Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at an easy way to memorize the unit circle. And the trick lies in recognizing the patterns. So if you follow along with me and you're able to catch them, this will be a very easy task. And let's begin. So we'll start off by labeling the circle. And first, let's do degrees. So right here will be 0, the beginning. And then each quadrant has 3 points inside. So it'll be 0, 30, 45, 60, and 90. And remember, this should be evenly spaced. I'm sorry for this. But let's go on to the second quadrant. Okay, so here are the degrees in the unit circle. And you might be thinking this is a lot to memorize and it's a lot to look at, but there's a very simple pattern here. So let's look at this first quadrant. So over here, the difference between the middle 2 points is 15 degrees. And between here is 30, and between here is 30. So look, 30, 15, 30, and this rule applies to all 4 quadrants. For example, here are the middle 2 for the 4th quadrant, and look at the difference. It's 15 degrees. So if you know this pattern, you'll know the degrees for all the points in the unit circle. And now let's look at the radians. So in the first quadrant, the first radians will be 0 again. That does not change. And remember, when you're writing for radians, you have to put the pi sign next to it. So this will be 0. This will be pi over 6. And before I finish the circle, I want to point out a pattern that many students will miss. So let's look at this. For the first point, it's pi over 6. So let's follow this. So this will be pi over 6. This will be 2 pi over 6. So you skip over the second one and you go to the third one. So pi over 6, 2 pi over 6 over here. And then this is 3 pi over 6. And this point right next to it will be 4 pi over 6, which is 2 pi over 3. And then at 150 degrees, it will be 5 pi over 6. And then at 180, 6 pi over 6, which is pi. And let me continue this throughout. Sorry, I forgot to write 360 degrees. But let's look at this. So over here, let me use a different color pen actually. So this will be 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6, 4 pi over 6, 5 pi over 6, 6 pi over 6, 7 pi over 6, 8 pi over 6, 9 pi over 6, 10 pi over 6, 11 pi over 6, and 12 pi over 6, which is 2 pi. So if you look at each of these sections, you'll see a pattern. And you'll see that except for the middle middle point for all 4 quadrants, the points follow the 6th rule, if you want to say. So you can see how it adds 1 pi over 6 each time it goes through the points. But it skips the other section, which is the pi over 4 subgroup. So the pi over 4 group also includes the major group, which is this. See that? So the points that are circled in yellow are going to be the main points, or I like to call them the main points of the unit circle. And these points will be included in the pi over 6 group and the pi over 4 group. So as we just went over the pi over 6 group, you can see which points in each quadrant are in the pi over 6 group. So it'll be the first one, as in 0 pi. Let's look over here. So this, we already saw, was in the pi over 6 group. And then it went to this number, then it skipped this number, it skipped the pi over 4, then it went to pi over 3, then it went to pi over 2, then it went to 2 pi over 3, and then it skipped the 135 degrees, and it went to 5 pi over 6, and so on. So the numbers that are in, well, I just did gray, but that were in red additionally, are in the pi over 6 subgroup. So instead of having to memorize what they are, you can just add pi over 6 as you go through that group. And now let's look at the pi over 4 group, which starts off with this, pi over 4. So really all you need to memorize is pi over 6, pi over 4, and pi over 3. And then once you know this, you can fill in the rest of the circle using the pattern you know. So let's look at this group. So it starts off with pi over 4. Then it'll go to this main point, which is pi over 2. And then so it'll be pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, and then 3 pi over 4, and then 4 pi over 4, which is the pi, and then 5 pi over 4, and then 6 pi over 4, which is the 3 pi over 2, which is circled in yellow, and then 7 pi over 4, and then 8 pi over 4, which is the 2 pi. And let me label, this is the pi over 4 group. Okay, this probably looks a little messy, so let me zoom out a bit. So I have color-coded this, so just remember which numbers are part of the pi over 6 group and which numbers are part of the pi over 4 group. And as you can tell, the pi over 4 group has less numbers because 1 over 4 is a larger number than 1 over 6. So it takes less time to fill it up to 2 pi. So just remember this trick. And this way you don't have to memorize the numbers as it is, and you can fill it in without having to know the numbers beforehand, if that makes sense. And now let's look at the coordinate points. So I'm going to make this a bit smaller. And then let's look. So this point right here will be 1, 0. Up here will be 0, 1. Here will be -1, 0. And then here will be 0, 1. And this is why it's called the unit circle, because the radius is 1. And now let's look at the coordinate points of each of the points on the unit circle. And memorizing this is very simple. As you can see, the first, or let me get my colors. So this point and this point the x and the y values are just switched. So remember that. And for this point, it's the same number. Pi over 2, or square root of 2 over 2, comma, square root of 2 over 2. And I know I just drew this in the first quadrant, but let's say you want to draw it in, or you want to label the points in the fourth quadrant. So pretend you're taking these numbers and you're flipping them right over the x-axis. So it's almost like you're doing a vertical reflection. So the point over here would be whatever is flipped, right? So it would be, but remember it's going to be negative 1 over 2. Because don't forget that in the first quadrant, the x and y are positive. Second quadrant, y is positive, but x is negative. In the third quadrant, x and y are negative. And in the fourth quadrant, x is positive, but y is negative. So this is why I did negative 1/2. And then here would be the same. And then this one would be and the pattern will be the same. So let's say you're taking the fourth quadrant and you're trying to label the third quadrant. So pretend you're flipping that right over the y-axis. So it's going to be the same numbers except these. Here, let me move it a bit. Now the x value is going to be negative as well. So let's do that. Sorry about that. Let me erase that. Okay, and it's the same thing in the second quadrant. So when you flip it over, or you can flip the third quadrant points over the x-axis, or the first quadrant points over the y-axis. And the x will be negative and the y will be positive. And I'm not going to draw this because the pattern should be clear by now. So this is the unit circle. And I want to go over the pattern for labeling the points really quickly. So remember the degrees, remember this pattern. The middle two will be divided by 15 degrees, and then the first, or the very first one in each quadrant will be by 30 and by 30. So it's 30, 15, 30. And you can use this when you go all the way to 360. And remember the groups for the unit circle. So there's a pi over 6 group, which starts off pi over 6, or you can follow along while I'm reading along. But pi over 6, pi over 3, so 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6, 4 pi over 6, 5 pi over 6, 6 pi over 6, 7 pi over 6, 8 pi over 6, 9 pi over 6, 10 pi over 6, 10 pi over 6, 11 pi over 6, 12 pi over 6. Then we have our pi over 4 group, which will be 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, 6 pi over 4, and 7 pi over 4. Finally, 8 pi over 4. So I know all the colors are a bit overwhelming, but I hope you followed along and understood the pattern. And this is a very important tool as you'll need it for pre-cal and of course calculus. And now I want to close this video with the final formula that will be useful. And as you can see, the unit circle uses both degrees and radians, so it's helpful to know how to switch between these two measurements. So if you're going from the multiplying, or the number in which you should multiply the degrees by, is pi pi over 180. So for example, if you have 30 degrees and you multiply by 180 over pi, you should get pi over 6, which, as we can see in the unit circle, that is correct. And obviously, if you do the opposite, so radians to degrees, right, the factor will be 180 over pi.